Yes, you read that title correctly. We're reviewing Riverdale Season 1 today. So let's get the elephant out of the room. I do not like this show. Though that's not really an unpopular opinion, as most people that I know don't like this show. But most of them don't find the first season that bad. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite. They think the first season is gold, which it's not. But my problems with the show go even further than that. I remember the first time that I watched this show about a year and a half ago. There was something in the show that I just kept getting on my nerves, but I couldn't seem to figure out why. And I even tried making reviews back then, but I had no idea how to stay calm, and they were usually just angry rants. But believe me, I've been looking forward to doing this since the day I started watching the show. And now that I'm slightly better, I can actually talk about this show without losing my shit. The episode begins with a narrator describing the town of Riverdale, and in most mediocre shows or movies, they'll tend to use a narrator incorrectly, only using them at the beginning and end of the story. But in this show, they actually use them consistently throughout the show, so I'll give them that.
Story is about a town, a small town, and the people who live in the town.
You don't say. I never would have guessed that a show named after a town would be about the people in said town. Also, I just want to mention that the town's motto is "The Town with Pep," which seems like it's supposed to be misdirection, since as you'll see, this town is anything but. Though to be fair, we actually have some calming music over 61 Impala on the highway. Kinda like most modern car commercials do, but whatever. We learn that a boy named Jason drowned while boating with his sister Cheryl, who we will get to. But for the time being, we see the cops digging around for Jason's body in the lake, with no success. As the narrator continues to narrate what we're seeing on the screen. You know the rule, show don't tell? Well, this show doesn't understand that rule, as it uses the narrator to narrate what's being shown on screen, as if it's show and tell. But the narrator more or less goes away after this scene, so I'm not too annoyed. Not yet, anyways.
Dead, Hal. I hope in those last moments he suffered. May Jason Blossom burn in hell.
This character is Alice, and she is another character that we will talk about later. She is one of my least favorite characters in the show, and if you've seen the show, you know that's an accomplishment. In fact, this line is pretty much foreshadowing her behavior throughout the series, even if this is your first watch through of the episode, and you know literally nothing about anyone, it kinda taints your perspective of Jason as a bad person, which I'm pretty sure isn't what they were going for. Afterwards, we hear the narrator explain why Jason died, and it needs to be heard to be believed.
Cheryl dropped a glove in the water, and Jason reached down to get it, and accidentally tipped the boat, and panicked, and drowned.
So, of all the ways you could have had Jason drown, you chose picking up a glove that fell in the water. I know what they're trying to do, make Cheryl feel like she's responsible for his death, but there are more structured ways to do that. The glove thing is what you would use if you were satirizing this plotline, but this isn't self-parody. I know that it might seem like I'm nitpicking, but the problems really do get distracting. I know that it's a common joke that teen dramas use a shit ton of cliches, and I know this show is no exception, but everything in this show that isn't a cliche is just confusing and stupid. Anyways, before I get too sidetracked, we get introduced to our main characters. First is Veronica, who has some interesting lines.
What is a chocolate shop and
I can't tell if that was a joke that they just didn't convey well enough, or if she's supposed to be an idiot. But considering the show, you'll see it raining cupcakes before you know the answer. Next characters are Kevin and Betty, the latter of which is nervous about seeing Archie because she believes that he likes her and just hasn't made a move.
Why, Kevin? Hasn't he ever said or done anything?
Because Archie's swell. But like most millennial straight guys, he needs to be told what he wants. So he got hot.
Also, for the two people who couldn't tell from that line, Kevin is gay. I know that most people have made memes about Netflix characters becoming gay, but here he's basically a gay stereotype. Not a blatant one, mind you, but you can still tell because of how his dialogue is written. Look at his acting, listen to the tone of his voice. You can tell that the writers were trying to write a gay stereotype without writing a gay stereotype, which I'm pretty sure is insulting to the gay community. Also, one other notable thing about this scene. Betty is wearing nothing but a bra and underwear, and these are 16-year-olds. But don't worry, I'll get to that later as well, because it gets creepy. Also, look at this particular scene. It perfectly showcases the problem with the dialogue.
To pass time, I would start composing these poems in my head, and at night I'd go home, I'd write them
Well,
down.
you don't even like reading poetry.
Oh, they weren't poems. They were song lyrics.
For those who may not be in the know-how, there's this thing called proofreading. It's a neat little trick to prevent things like that from happening. And, oh, not these scenes. You know, those scenes where a character just walks in slow motion while music is playing, like they're in a clothes commercial to show off that one person is in love with the other person. It's so overdone that it's been mocked and ridiculed for years, and yet they're still using it unironically. There are less trite ways of showing that one character is in love with another character. After some awkward small talk, we established that Archie likes Veronica, and you probably think that Betty is going to be bitter of Veronica, but actually, no. All of the hints that that could happen were completely useless, because the next day at school, they're hanging out like they're best buds. You know, transitions. They're not optional. We cut to the next day, where Betty's getting ready for school, and we see that Alice is pretty fixed on making sure Betty is a successful student, which makes sense, but I don't understand why she's sitting on Betty's bed while she's packing her bag. That's just weird. I could understand if she was doing it downstairs or at the door, but here, it's just weird.
Athletics, maintaining a decent character.
Remember that for me. I guess Alice is the overprotective parent since she keeps making comments like, "You missed curfew," even though Betty brings up that it was only by 7 minutes. But what really gets me is that she doesn't want Betty hanging out with Archie because his hair color reminds her of Jason. I'm not kidding. Remember how I said that everything about this show that isn't cliche is just stupid? Well, this is hard evidence to support that. And it does disastrous things to the rest of the show. Once the main characters get to school, we have about 15 seconds of a jock rambling, and it's awkward. Well, at least until Archie answers him.
Did you tap some cougar ass this summer?
You know what?
And they made it awkward again. Seriously, I do not understand this dialogue. There are so many moments of the show that feel like self-parody, and others that feel like it wants me to take it seriously, which are pretty much opposing concepts. So I don't know how to interpret these lines. Are they jokes? Is it supposed to be funny because a real 16-year-old would never say that? Even though that's the target audience.
That's more a fantasy from your wank bank, Reggie. Okay.
I have no comment on that one. That's not even the weirdest part. That would be the fact that he shrugs it off so nonchalantly. Also, that scene had no purpose. Get used to it. There's a few, let's call them trends in the show that will get annoying.
Honestly, I feel like I'm wandering through the lost epilogue of our town.
Annoying trend number 2, constantly having the characters reference things that no one in the target audience is bound to get. This is the second time that they've done that in the first quarter of the episode, and spoilers, it's not the last.
On Sunday nights? Thank God for HBO.
I've never watched Game of Thrones, so maybe there's a reference that I'm missing, but there was no point to that line. Unless you want to count it as the reason Veronica knows that Kevin is gay. Either that or she noticed that he was written as a gay stereotype. She does get mad when he brings up her father, though, and Betty gives him a dirty look, kind of out of nowhere. Honestly, I share your confusion. Oh hey, Archie abandoned the people he said he would help give a tour to the school to see if Josie and the Pussycats would help perform his music. He's such a compassionate character. I can't wait to see more of his charming behavior.
Let me just stop you right there. You're staring at our pussycat ears, which is rude, but
For some reason, they get offended when people look at their hairbands, but it's never inferred that Archie was actually looking at her ear headbands. So I don't know why she even said that. And if looking at your hairbands is rude, then why do you wear them as part of your costume? One which you wear while you're on stage in front of a crowd of people, who are all staring at you guys. This might sound small, but each line of dialogue is just confusing. I have no idea if it's just a brain fart or if the writers just don't know how to write teenagers. But the whole time you're just confused to take what's going on seriously.
telling our story with songs we write.
Remember that as well. It's going to come back at the end of the episode. When Archie is done with that, we cut back to Betty and Veronica, who aren't mad that Archie ditched him. Once again, proofreading. It doesn't hurt. We cut to the auditorium where Cheryl is talking about how her and Jason were soulmates and all things like that I will get to at one point. But first, something really weird happens.
Thank you all.
Miss Grundy? Hey.
Archie, what are you doing walking in this heat?
Building character?
Yeah, I'm sure. That's why you ditched your friends for your own selfish ends. But oh well, they didn't seem to care anyway. But this next scene is where things get uncomfortable. We cut to them making out in a car in the rain. So, tell me, what's the most notable thing about the scene? No, not the fact that it's randomly trying to reference the Titanic. It's the fact that a 16-year-old is making out with a teacher who's probably around a decade older than he is. Like, what in the fresh hell were the writers thinking when they wrote the scene? Yeah, I get it. The guy playing Archie is an adult, but he's playing a 16-year-old. A 16-year-old who's fucking one of his teachers. And no, it's not a joke. We're supposed to see their relationship as genuine, which is just disgusting. Anyways, after that scene, we get the title card. Over a quarter of the way through the episode. Great place to put it. Afterwards, Archie goes to talk to the pedophile.
Make an appointment. During my office hours, my official office hours.
You're a fucking teacher. What the hell office hours are you talking about? This obviously takes place during school hours as there are students walking through the halls. Now I'm confused. Let's just move on. We see Hermione trying to get a job in the one scene that actually has a decent joke.
Can I get you anything? Would you like a water?
A job.
It's not great, but it actually made me laugh the first time that I saw it. And it might seem better only because it's followed by a bunch of pointless small talk.
Dated for a little while. Well, at least until I
Chose the rich kid.
Don't you hate it in movies and TV shows when the characters are just talking about things that they both already know as a poor excuse for exposition and are like, remember that time we dated but now we're not because I'm an asshole and dumped you for the rich kid? You know, at least the other subplots had flashbacks. Actually, I can't really call this forced exposition because it's completely pointless, and it just keeps going.
And now a reversal of fortune.
Did you forget your line? Because you can do a second take, you know. Oh, who am I kidding? This show is for teenagers. They won't care. Just please stop.
We'll have Hermione Lodge, the wife of Hiram Lodge, on trial for fraud and embezzlement, balancing my books.
Why won't you stop? You know what? I'll just go check on the main characters, who are all eating lunch together while listening to Archie's music.
I thought we were gonna have to pretend to like it, but it's actually really good.
Well, you're an asshole. Although I can't say Mr. Ditch's friends doesn't deserve it. Then Archie leaves to meet Miss Grundy, who I guess made an appointment during her office hours. After he leaves, Cheryl joins and somehow knows Veronica's name and tries to convince her to join the cheerleading team.
Is cheerleading still a thing?
Is being the gay best friend still a thing?
Both of those questions were stupid. Matches the show quite well, though. Veronica agrees and tries to shoehorn in Betty.
Betty's already got so much on her plate right now.
What the hell are you talking about? She's probably the least busy of all of you guys. Cheryl has to deal with her brother's death and all the students giving her sympathy, and Veronica has to get used to a new environment. What the fuck does Betty have to do? Unless she literally meant her plate was too full, which is completely irrelevant. After Cheryl leaves, Betty explains that she would join, but Cheryl made fun of Betty for being fat last year, which is stupid, because she isn't fat anymore, and I don't see Cheryl's logic. Then Kevin makes a Mad Men reference. Why? I don't think any teenager will get the reference. The only reason I do is because I had to look it up. Let's just go check on Archie and the pedophile, who are listening to Archie's music again. She tries to compliment him.
Very real. Very personal.
It doesn't sound genuine. Though I guess she learned her lesson, because she declines Archie's request to teach him music.
I don't think we should be alone together.
She says as she smiles. Though unlike other scenes, this one actually establishes that while they were alone making out in the woods, they heard a gunshot near where Jason died.
Who's lighting fireworks at 6 in the morning?
How?
I think a better question is who makes out in the woods at 6 a.m.? Archie tries to convince her to come clean to the police, as it could be helpful to find Jason's killer, but she keeps saying things like,
We explain why we were together at Sweetwater River at 6 a.m. on the 4th of July.
Wait, hold on. The 4th of July? I thought that Jason had died right before school started. Suddenly things are starting to make way less sense. I mean, how hard is it for one of them to come clean to the police? Grundy keeps harping on about how if they told the cops, then they would have to confess what they were doing, and Grundy would get arrested. You know, if just one of them told the cops that they were in the woods alone, hiking, or going for a walk while they heard the gunshot, everything would add up. That never occurs to them. These characters aren't very smart. As proof, you can see that after Betty and Veronica showcase their shtick, Cheryl demands to see some heat and sizzle.
Where's the heat? Where's the sizzle?
Then, because Veronica is stupid, she decides to kiss Betty in the lips for 8 uninterrupted seconds. It's uncomfortable, and it feels like I'm watching someone's fetish porn, and they let it drag. Remember, these are 16-year-olds. Cheryl is the only person in the scene who seems to share my frustration, which makes her the most relatable character in this scene. Or it would if she wasn't the one who asked them for some sizzle. Seriously, what the fuck is going on? Betty and Veronica must be bisexual, because Betty has absolutely no reaction after Veronica's done with her kiss. Then because Cheryl got what she asked for, she starts acting bitter towards Betty, bringing up that Jason and her sister dated, which apparently resulted in Betty's sister having a mental breakdown and being sent to a mental institution. Cheryl continues to try to rile Betty up.
Whatever you've been dying to spew about Jason and how he treated Polly, unleash it. Just
Betty continues to keep her cool, which is highlighted to be difficult. And Cheryl even kicks Betty out of the cheerleading, which I guess means she doesn't like Betty because her sister dated her brother, and her brother was, I guess, abusive? This might have made sense if it didn't come out of nowhere, and yes, this is all in the same scene as the kiss. Veronica takes offense and intimidates Cheryl to accept Betty in what I ordinarily would call forced, but the whole thing about Cheryl not liking Betty for her sister could have been removed from the scene and put somewhere else, so it's just messy and not well organized. Veronica does end up calling out Cheryl for being an entitled bitch, and you'd expect Cheryl to hate them both and want nothing to do with either of them now, but because Veronica is the POV character in the scene, Cheryl accepts to take them both because plot. But not before we cut to Archie playing football. Sure, that was important enough to interrupt the other subplot. The only thing that this scene establishes is that Archie now has Jason's number in football, which, in a well-written story, would give Cheryl a reason to treat Archie like shit, but they don't do that. You could argue that it's left there to give him motivation, but it never does. Archie does hesitate a little, since it will cost him a lot of time, and uses working for his dad's company as a cover for his music, so his coach tells him to sleep on it. Anyway, back to the slightly less stupid subplot. Betty asks Veronica why she stood up for Betty. Because she's your friend, and that's what friends do. Actually, instead of that, Veronica decides to explain her convoluted backstory, explaining that she was way worse than Cheryl and how she moved to get a fresh start. So in her words, she defended Betty not because Betty is her friend, but because she didn't want to be seen as a brat like Cheryl. Ignoring the fact that it doesn't make any sense, it just makes her seem selfish, which is not a trait you usually want for your main characters. Also, this is just a nitpick, but Veronica says that she and her family were receiving letters from trolls, but then admits that the letters were bringing up legitimate points against their horrible family. That's more like a lynch mob, but if you guys actually are horrible, then they aren't even that. Anyways, Betty tells Veronica that when Polly and Jason were in a relationship, Jason didn't really care, and for some reason Alice had a vendetta against her and started claiming that Polly wasn't her daughter.
My mom turned on Polly. Said Polly wasn't her daughter anymore. Said all these awful things to her. My mom who broke her.
I knew that Alice wasn't going to be my favorite character, but Jesus Christ, how bad can you make someone sound? They're obviously trying to make her really unlikable, because, let me guess, at the end of the season, they're going to try to validate Alice and make her seem good, but something tells me that they're either going to fuck it up or just flat out forget about it. Either way, it's not important right now because we have to worry about a start of the year dance. Okay, I guess that's a thing that exists in this universe. Because Archie, Veronica, and Betty decide to go to one after a bunch of redundant dialogue. Betty seems to be really happy about how her day turned out because she breaks out dancing in her room. I'm not even kidding. and is only interrupted by, Alice.
Is that?
I guess she heard the racket and was concerned that she had lost her mind.
The cheerleading squad.
Or I guess she was referring to the cheerleading outfit.
Cheryl Blossom's cheerleading squad?
No, the school's cheerleading squad. She's just the captain. For some reason, Alice doesn't want Betty to join the cheerleading squad because...
After what Jason did to Polly?
You mean that daughter of yours that you had so little respect for that you decided to abandon her? Seriously, I don't get your logic. For some reason, Betty never brings this up to her. She just tells Alice no when she tells her to take off her uniform. She instead says that she does everything to be a perfect person, and she wants to have this one thing for herself. Even though earlier Alice recommended that Betty get involved in after-school curriculars, which cheerleading is. Betty then tells Alice she's going to buy a dress for the dance, one which she is taking Archie and Veronica to. Alice for some reason hates Veronica because she knows her parents, who are people who just moved in from New York City. You know, I think that Alice just uses any excuse she can find to hate everyone, no matter how piss poor that reason may be. This scene does bring up an interesting question, however. Why wasn't Betty taken away from Alice the minute she was born? You remember how incompetent the parents in the Rugrats became in the later seasons? Well, even they don't got shit on Alice. Alice tried to convince Betty that her new friend, someone she's never met before, will stab her in the back. Great parenting, am I right? Well, Archie's dad isn't much better.
I got a call from your coach today. He's under the impression that you can't play varsity football because I'm making you work for me. Which is odd because you made it seem like you couldn't work for me because you were playing football. So my first question is, who are you lying to?
Archie gets caught in his lie. Archie admits he was lying to both of them, and tells his dad that he wants to pursue his passion in music.
Football takes you to college. College takes you to business school. Business.
I'm afraid I don't see your logic. Playing football won't help his chances of going to a business school. It'll help you if you're becoming a professional athlete, which Archie isn't going to be.
You know, these decisions that you're making now, son, they have consequences. They go on to form who you are and who you be confident enough in it that you don't have to lie.
Archie's dad is trying to tell Archie that pursuing his passion in music is a bad idea. What the fuck is with the parents in the show? They're all shit! Anyways, time to go to the dance. No shit, you aren't in New York, unless you're trying to say that the dance is of lower quality than you expected, because that would make you an asshole.
We in this post-James Franco world be all things at once?
What does that even mean? Could you not before James Franco? Or is that just some poorly executed reference? Eventually, Veronica and Archie leave Betty for contrived reasons.
Betty, you will not believe who just propositioned me in the bathroom. Give you a hint. His name may be Moose, but I describe a certain appendage of his as horse-like.
I wanted you guys to see that. Not just because it has a bad dick joke, but because it has nothing to do with anything and is just there to get a chuckle from the audience they're pandering to. Eventually, Archie makes it his way to Mrs. Grundy.
Didn't we have a deal?
No, Geraldine, we have a secret.
And it's much more discreet if I say it in the middle of a crowded school dance where anyone could hear us. They continue talking about the day the gunshot went off while people walk right by them, until he manages to convince her to give him music lessons. This scene was pointless. You could have had her just say yes earlier.
Good evening, friends. Are you all having a good time?
No. By the way, remember earlier when Josie went on and on about how they only performed their own songs for identity reasons and how there were no exceptions? Well, just listen to what Cheryl has to say.
Though they usually perform their own material, tonight they're making an exception and
Archie makes his way back to Betty and talks about his schedule, because that's really romantic. Well, Archie starts hesitating about being with Betty, and then looks at Mrs. Grundy, of course. Can you guys please drop this? It's awkward enough as it is. Later, at Cheryl's after party, they all play Spin the Bottle, and because Cheryl is the antagonist, you know she's trying to sabotage the main three's friendship. So she chooses Archie to go first, and he goes along with it due to peer pressure. And Cheryl spins the bottle, which lands on Veronica. Quick question, Cheryl. If you're trying to sabotage their friendship, what makes you certain that the bottle will land on Veronica? That's like flipping a coin between Veronica and Betty and not knowing if it'll land on heads or tails. Anyway, while they're in the closet, they make awkward small talk for a while until they eventually make out. First of all, Veronica kept trying to convince Archie to like Betty, including in this scene, so none of this makes any sense. Second of all, this is the third time in this episode alone that there's a long, tedious making out scene. The first with Archie and Mrs. Grundy, the second with Veronica and Betty, and now Archie and Veronica. I get that this show is a romance, but you kind of lose that excuse when you have Veronica and Betty kiss with no romantic context for literally no reason. Anyway, once Archie and Veronica leave the closet, Cheryl tells them that Betty left, and Veronica only now realizes that it was Cheryl's plan all along. And Veronica and Archie leave to find Betty. You know, the scene might make sense if Archie didn't tell Betty he was reluctant to date her at the dance, saying that he had no romantic intentions. Veronica says that they should split up to go look for Betty, but in the very next scene, Veronica is at home, and for some reason she lies down on her mother's lap, who proceeds to pet her like a dog. That scene had no point. For some reason, the narrator starts talking as Archie is walking towards the chocolate shop, and we learn that the narrator is a character in the show, Jughead, and he and Archie talk about the Jason incident, that is the subject of the novel he's writing. And the narration is just the text in his novel, which is definitely an interesting idea, but why would he be talking about how his friend walked into a diner in the middle of the night looking for his friend? Jughead ends up telling Archie that their friendship should be resolved after they talk about it, so Archie heads over to Betty's house, who is for some reason waiting outside for him. Betty starts to become desperate and asks Archie if he loves her, and instead of saying that he loves her as a friend, he says this.
You are so perfect. I've never been good enough for you.
Which ends up making them both sad. I guess Archie's sad because he knows he can't give Betty what she wants. But come on, this seems too melodramatic. They have sad music playing over silence for like 10 seconds, trying way too hard to emphasize something that isn't really that important. This whole time, we knew that Archie wasn't into Betty. This stuff happens all the time in the real world, and besides, Betty didn't have much of a reaction at the dance when Archie hesitated. But let's move on, we're almost done. Kevin and Moose, who is not gay, want to go skinny dipping in the lake, because that's what teenagers do nowadays, but Kevin trips over Jason's corpse. And because the episode wants to gross the audience out, the camera pans on him for like 10 interrupted seconds, and we see a bullet hole in his forehead. You know, I thought the cops would have checked around the lake in case his corpse got beached, and even if you want to say that the cops just didn't find it, it couldn't have just been that remote of a spot, as it took people like 5 seconds to walk there from their car. Though after the police do find it, everyone in town shows up as they take his body out of the lake. Weird how many people find this stuff interesting. And the episode finally ends with the narrator telling us that the first arrest would occur tomorrow. So, how bad do I think this show is? Well, it's definitely not the worst thing I've ever seen. Far from it. It's just nowhere near the best thing that I've ever seen. If you're a person like me, then you will not like this show. I don't like this show. The dialogue is either random stupid or just lazy exposition, and the show doesn't really have any consistency. They could say one thing in one scene, and it'll be something completely different in the next. That is if they haven't forgotten about it, which does occur quite often. I can definitely see how some people can like the show because of its flaws, but I find it too tedious for that to be the case. When it comes to what this episode managed to establish, the pacing was okay. Not the best, but not the worst. There aren't many other shows I can name that have worse pacing, but it's not as bad as those other shows. It's definitely slow and annoying and awkward, so it's not a very pleasant experience. So join me next week when I review episode 2. Also, I know I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but sorry for the delay. I know I said I would have a video out by Thursday, but I had a bit more schoolwork than I was expecting, so forgive me if my video schedule isn't consistent. I will try my damnedest to make sure I have a video uploaded every week, though.